Evening and welcome to our first Ask the Farmer Q&A session for June. My name is Bridget Barry and I coordinate Farming for Nature. Farming for Nature was set up to encourage and inspire farmers that farm or wish to farm more for nature. Each year we have the National Farming for Nature Ambassador Awards, whereby we find exemplary farmers that are doing great work on their land for nature. And this Q&A session is a great way to learn from these farmers, find out firsthand what they're doing on their land, and if you have any questions that you're able to ask the farmers. So I'll kickstart the session tonight by asking our guest speaker a few questions, and then feel free to write any questions you have into the chat box, which is on the banner at the bottom of your screen. Well, it's at the bottom of my screen anyway, I assume it's at the bottom of your screen. If you miss any of the session tonight, or you've missed any of the previous sessions, they're all up on our YouTube channel, and this session will be up on our YouTube channel if you have to leave early. It will be up there by tomorrow afternoon, so feel free to listen to it, to share it or listen to it in your tractor in the field and share it with anyone that you think might be interested to listen to it. So on to tonight's session. We're delighted to welcome Monaghan farmer Pat McKenna with us. Pat runs a 90 herd farm, suckler herd, up in County Monaghan on the foothills of Slieve Bay, and on 60 acres there. So Pat, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much, Bridget.
Pat, you might just describe your farm and your farming system for us.
The farm is, as Bridget said, the home farm, as we would call it, is about 65 acres, just in the Slieve Bay foothills. In addition to that, then we have some mountain ground, which we have on a long-term lease from Antashka. It's up on the top of Slieve Bay. There's a few hundred acres up there. And then we have about 40 acres of land quite close to Monaghan town here, which would be pretty good land or improved land or whatever you want to call it, which we use for finishing off the cattle.
And can you tell us about your own journey into running this farm? I
suppose we bought the farm about 20 years ago. It joined our home farm where we were reared. And it was a farm that when we were kids that we would have visited a lot. There were a lovely old couple who lived there and they were great characters, and we sort of formed a bond with them and with our land because we had worked it when we were children, saved hay, turf, and done all that sort of thing. Kaylee'd in there as well. So it was sort of a keepsake that we bought it. And when we bought it, we didn't want to run an intensive farming system on it. We wanted to do something favorable to nature, and the first thing we done was we bought some Dexters. We bought 15 or 20 Dexter cattle across in the UK and imported them, and got into glass and ran the Dexters in glass. There was a reasonably good payment. It was an unlimited payment at that stage. The payment right now is limited to 10 head and at €200 per head. So at that stage, it was unlimited. So it was a good way to pull good payments in from the department and do some good by having a rare breed. And one of the reasons we into the Dexters was they're a good. We looked at them as a good crossbreed. They can turn into a good beefy finished animal. The beef is in pretty good demand, even at that stage, which was 15, 20 years ago. The beef was featuring on, particularly in the UK, on a lot of chefs were pushing the Dexter beef as being a highly flavoured and a highly desired product. And also they're a good milking animal. There are a couple of people threatening to milk them and make cheese, but I suppose we wanted them basically for the beef. And we established that herd. And I suppose another thing that we had in mind when we did get into the Dexters was that they're small animals. They're about half the size of a commercial, your typical Charlie or your limousine. The land that we bought, the farm was quite wet. It would be typical North Monaghan, blue clay, not great drainage. And we didn't want to go mad draining it and improving it too much. So we looked at the Dexters as being a light animal that would have no impact. And we were hoping to do some outwintering, and that has been successful. We'd be outwintering maybe 15 or 20 down there. But obviously, with the nitrates directive came out, we did put up a slatted house with a fairly big dry bedded area, and at the minute, the Dexters, most of them are wintered in, but we're in a situation at the minute where we would outwinter 10 or 15 on the core farm down at the border. We would keep 10 or 15 as well on our improved land quite close to Monaghan town. And in the winter past, we outwintered 5 on Slave Bay up in the mountain, and they all done pretty well, particularly the ones up in the mountain. They seem to have thrived.
So did you do that? Sorry, did you do that in order to, save costs, or was it just a kind of part of your grazing regime that you outwintered them?
I suppose our strategy with the farm was to run a low-cost system. We wanted to try and create a habitat down there, something that in the area where we have curlews. I have skylarks on the farm down there. There's a hen harrier down there at the minute, and we have the normal run-of-the-mill badgers. We have brown hares down there, and I suppose we wanted to create a habitat, but also have a farming system that would be low inputs. And I suppose over the 20 years, that has been our objective, is to keep our inputs low. Mm-hmm. And our inputs, we are sowing no fertilizer. We apply a fair bit of lime, and we are dependent on clover and depending on farmyard manure from our dry bedded areas. We have, obviously, from our tank that we put up when the nitrate directive came in, we have slurry, and we put on slurry low volumes as much as possible and put it on at the right time of the year. And that's essentially our farming system. We're looking to create as low an impact on the ground as possible, and to have the lowest possible inputs, and to maximize our output using clover as the driver of grass growth particularly on the farm close to Monaghan here and on the home farm.
And do you find year on year it gets more productive, or you know? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that farmers are afraid of reducing inputs, particularly on marginal land like that. There, you think if we don't sow fertilizer, we're not going to have anything. And I would have farmers saying that to me: if you don't sow fertilizer on that ground, you won't have anything. But I have found that if you put the lime on and you give the clover a chance, and give the worms a chance as well, that means the slurry put on sparingly, not too much nitrogen. If you give a farm 2 or 3 years, the clover will establish itself. And once your clover establishes, and once your worm population and the bacteria population in the soil builds up, you will grow good volumes of grass. Now, obviously, on a marginal farm like that, you're not going to grow huge volumes of grass, but I'd be more than happy with what we have at the minute on that farm down there. Right now, I think we're grazing 80 head of Dexters between cows, calves, and different followers, and on 60 acres of pretty marginal land, 10 or 12 acres of which we planted with broadleaves. I think that's a pretty good stocking rate.
And so when your cattle out winter, the few that do they calf out, or they're...
Yeah, our objective would be to have the herd calving out. We'd run the bull fairly late. You'd be talking about end of July. We'd put the bull in with the cows. At 25 calves, roughly 25 calves on the ground this year, all calved out. No assistance at all. And I'm a strong believer in calving out, for the simple reason that your calf jumps up straight away. The Dexter calves are renowned for being very lively and for getting up on their feet pretty quickly and suckling fairly quickly. And Dexters are a funny animal, because I have found over the years that if you're mooching around watching for a Dexter to calve, she won't calve. But if you go away and come back in 2 hours, or come back the next day, your calf will be running about. Listen, that suits me down to the ground.
Mm.
It's low labour, and I suppose in real terms the Dexters would be fairly sprightly and would be fairly lively, and even if it was a situation where a cow needed assistance, you would have to get her into a yard. You know, you wouldn't be assisting her outside, you'd have to get her into a yard. But touch wood, for this year, no assistance, and all the calves live on the ground, so we're pretty happy with that.
And you're part of a grazing trial up there on the mountains. Do you like, what is the grazing regime as part of this trial?
Yeah, up on the mountain with a few hundred acres, courtesy of Antashka, and for 2 years now we've been doing low impact grazing, conservation type grazing up there. It's not fenced, and obviously it's an SAC, so you're not allowed to do too much in the line of fencing. So we approached a Norwegian company called No Fence. They run the collars, No Fence collars, and we bought, I think, around 30 of the collars last year, and we're using those collars on the animals. You basically download an app to your phone and you put the collars around their neck. They get an alarm when they come close to the perimeter that you set. It's similar to what you would see maybe in areas where you have a dog in a garden. You can have the wire around the garden, and then the dog comes close, he gets a sound or he gets a shock. It works on the same principle as an electric fence. There's a solar charger in the collar, and it keeps the battery in the collar charged. And then if the animal strays over the boundary line or your preset boundary line, it gets a shock. Actually, we have found that once the system is up and running, and if the animals get the proper training, or if you use a hedge or some sort of a margin as your perimeter, the cattle would maybe get shocked once, maybe up there. Then they learn to recognize the sound signals coming from the collar, and they know not to approach the perimeter.
And would you do a mechanism of kind of mob grazing with using the collars? Do you move the fence virtually?
Yeah, you can move pastures now. It's not quite that simple. There's a wee bit of logistics. You can move the perimeters, and I have moved cattle using the collars and using the app. But if there's a boundary to be crossed, if, say for argument's sake, a roadway or something like that there, they can be loath to cross it. Dexters are a wee bit like that. I think most cattle are probably like that. Dexters in particular like to be led. They don't like to be driven. Mm. So if I was moving them, I would go up there just to make sure that they all moved properly and that there were none missing. But anyway, I suppose back to the conservation end of it, that land hadn't been grazed in maybe 50 or 60 years, and it built up a very heavy burden of Malina grass. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't much of a habitat. Now, there are hen harriers up there, and there's a bit of wildlife up there, but not too many grouse, and you wouldn't see hares up there. It's not a great habitat for the simple reason that it's so overgrown that a hen harrier looking down has no visibility. There's about 1.5 feet or 2 feet of this Malina grass, which is dried and becomes wispy and becomes a tinder as well, which is a very, very high fire risk. So the strategy was to put the Dexters up there, to put them into it, and because they're light and handy, they weren't going to tramp that ground or damage that ground. But what they have done is they have made inroads into it. They've made wee paths through it. I remember the very first day I put them up there, and they were nearly disappearing in it, because they're very small. Some of them around 4 foot high, and if the Malina grass is 2 foot high, well, then you're only seeing the back of an animal. But over a period of a week or a fortnight, they made their wee paths through it, and then they started to branch out from those wee paths. And over time, they made a good impact on it, got the Malina grass trampled down, got them and eaten. And I suppose the time of year when we'd be putting them up, which will be from now on, we have 6 up there at the minute, but in the next few weeks when the Malina grass is really coming green will be the time to put them up, and we'll put the cattle up there. The areas that we grazed last year and the year before, you can already see that they've well broken up. You have clear areas, you have areas of good green, nearly like pasture, but you also have the scrubby areas on the cover, which to my mind provides a much better habitat for the likes of the hen harrier. Good habitat also for the prey of the hen harrier, your voles, your mice, your meadow pipits, skylarks as well, which I suppose we love to see skylarks, but they are also a prey for the hen harrier. So I think over time, over a few years, we will be able to make a good impact on that and create the sort of habitat where you can have grouse, where you can have skylarks, where you can have possibly curlews up there, and you'll have your hen harrier, and it will work much better as an ecosystem because it's being grazed and because that Molina grass and that fire risk has been reduced. The big danger, sorry, Bridget, with the Molina grass is if someone is up there camping or someone is up smoking, for argument's sake, at the right time of the year, and they throw away a cigarette, but bang, suddenly you could have several hundred hectares of the mountain burned. And it nearly always burns at a time when those birds are nesting, because that's the time when the grass is at its driest, before you've got the new grass, when the old grass is still on the ground, and that devastates those areas. And if you get a few hundred hectares of that type of habitat burnt, it doesn't come back for years. It takes 5 or 6, maybe 10 years before it becomes a proper habitat again. So we're using the Dexters quite strategically in that we're grazing. We started off grazing in the southwest of Slieve Bay, and because the prevailing winds are coming from the southwest, where our strategy is that if we graze that area first and break that area down first, there'll be less risk of the prevailing winds blowing the fire out over the mountain and damaging a lot of the mountain.
And is it, I know you've got your Dexters up there, but so would you find that the cattle are better for this kind of management than sheep or goats, or is there any argument for them as well, or is it they feel that cattle are the best thing for grazing Molina?
Yeah, I think, listen, sheep could be, there are no sheep up there at the minute. Slieve Bay in North Monaghan isn't really a sheep area. Personally speaking, I think with the volume of Molina grass that is on that up there, I don't think sheep will be able to make an impact on it. So I would imagine that the Dexters are ideal for it. Continental animals, maybe on some of it, the drier parts of it, the heathy parts of it, they could work, but again, where you've got blanket bog, which essentially is a blanket bog, I think the Dexters just are the ideal compromise. That's my thinking. They're not having a massive impact on it. If you had a wet year, they're not going to trample it. They're not going to break it down too much. There is management to it, obviously, and we're moving them around. If we do find that their impact is too much, we can go up there and use the app, and we can get them moved.
So on your Dexters, you sell the beef direct to customer, isn't it? To customers and to restaurants. How important is that to you?
We're doing that, Bridget. COVID did have a big impact on the market for Dexters, as people are probably well aware. The Dexter product was going directly into restaurants, into particularly high-end restaurants, and when COVID came along, those restaurants closed, demand slowed down, and demand for commercial beef picked up, obviously, because people were doing more shopping in supermarkets, and that demand still evident. But the market for them has come back around. But during the COVID period, I did concentrate more on beef boxes and slaughtering a few ourselves and selling them locally into the local meals in Wales is one, and also into local restaurants. Now it's hard enough work. There's a fair bit of logistics to it, but it definitely was a great outlet when COVID hit and there was no demand for Dexters. The demand essentially dried up, and the numbers out there built up, and it was a source of income, no doubt about it.
And how do you feel that the story of the grazing, aside from COVID, sorry, obviously, but kind of now that the business is picking up again, how do you feel that the story about kind of the conservation grazing and stuff adds to your product?
Yeah, it's a backstory. I think that the future for Dexter beef, and in particular, but also for commercial beef in Ireland, is to go with a backstory. Ireland is perceived as the Green Isle. It's got that backstory. The conservation grazing is basically an enhancement of that, and people that are going into high-end restaurants are, I suppose, becoming more ethical. They're looking for an ethical product, a conservation type product, and I think Dexter fits that niche perfectly. Where the market is only gaining ground again post-COVID, but I can see that there are more, probably prior to COVID, there was 1 or 2 big outlets for Dexters. I can see now that there may be a half a dozen, 10 people looking to source Dexters, and they're using that backstory. And when I'm trying to sell the product, I'm selling it on the taste and the flavour and the quality of the beef, but you're also selling it on the fact that it's been conservation grazed, that it's doing a good, nearly a public good in the conservation grazing. So that is definitely another string to the bow when you're marketing the product, whether it be me personally marketing the product to my 10 or 12 customers that I supply on a fairly regular basis, or someone who's trying to get into more volume can use that as a backstory as well.
Yeah, so hopefully nature is kind of adding value to your product there.
Yeah.
So on your farm in general, like what other management have you done to allow nature to thrive?
Well, I suppose everything possible. One thing we did do 7 or 8 years ago was we established about 12 acres of broadleaf forestry. There were a few fairly wet areas on the farm and fairly steep areas. And also there was one area which was slightly wooded. So we decided that we were going to do something with that. And to go on broadleaf was a great idea. To me, it's nearly the best habitat on the farm. It's up now 7 or 8 years. We planted it with birch and alder, and it's a great area to even go into. Trees are now maybe 20-25 foot up, and when you go down there, it's really peaceful. It's really quiet. Another advantage of it is that the ground has dried because the trees were obviously soaking up the moisture. And I suppose one thing that I would have in mind coming on from that there is agroforestry. It's something that I've looked at. Now I know I did look up, and I think there are only 2 people actually involved in agroforestry in Ireland. But I think that if the incentives were there, and the grant aid was over a longer term, the grant aid for agroforestry is 5 years. I think if the grant aid was over the standard 15 years as it is for conifers or for the evergreens, I think that there would be more farmers going into agroforestry, particularly on that marginal type land, for the simple reason that I think if you could graze underneath those trees, the trees are fixing nitrogen into the ground, they're drying the ground, they're providing shelter, and to me, it's a perfect environment to graze cattle in. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions around the grant aid, you can't do it. But I think it's a brilliant habitat. You can see anything down there. Deer is great for deer. No, deer are not ideal to have in your forest, but because it's up so high now and it's so well established, I don't mind that. And loads of birds, loads of wildlife down there, and I think it's a great place to go on the farm. One of my favorite places.
Do you have to do much management on the of the woodland? Like, do you have to fell it or?
No, I haven't done anything yet, Bridget. It's established 7 years. Just I suppose in the next year or 2 we'll be looking at thinning it out a bit, you know. And I'm looking forward to doing that. Just to leave even at the minute when you walk through it, you'll be looking at the good stems and looking at the trees. You'll be picking out trees that you know will mature well and will, whether it's it finishes up as firewood. To my mind, my attitude towards it is we'll thin it out. There will be good firewood in it when it's thinned out, and then I would nearly imagine that we would leave it as a semi-permanent woodland. I'd be hoping at some point in the future, when time comes to replant it, that we would leave mature trees on it, that it would be a woodland, and that it could be regenerated then by replanting it again. But management-wise, I have had no management input, but I will obviously be talking to my forester in the next year or two, looking to get it thinned out and looking to make a more mature and to make a better class of woodland out of that area, you know.
So the grant you got is for your 15 years, is it? Or
15 years, Bridget,
yeah.
That's right.
And when that finishes, you intend to, did you say cut it all out? And
No.
Okay.
I would hope to have a permanent woodland there.
Okay.
I'd be hoping that by the time it reaches the 15 years or whatever, that will be an incentive to plant it and to leave the big stems, leave the best of the trees in it, so you would have a woodland that's recycling all the time. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen in my time, but you'd be hoping that you would replant it and that you would have a rotation then. You would have trees, 60, 70-year-old, big mature trees, and you would also have seedlings. So you would have a woodland that would function as you see maybe some woodlands in Europe or some broadleaf woodlands maybe in parts of Ireland where people are taking timber out of it on a rotational basis. That's what I would envisage for that area.
Perfect. Listen, there's a couple of questions here, so I'll just kind of ask them there to you. Dan McCarthy has asked, is there rushes on the mountain farm and how do you deal with them?
No, not on the mountain farm. On my home farm, which would be in the land which we have in the foothills where I keep the main herd, there's rushes on that. I suppose the rushes are a problem. There's no way around it. When we bought the farm initially, one thing that we did do, and it seemed to clear out the rushes fairly well, was we used mushroom compost. Mushroom compost, fairly high lime content, and we put mushroom compost on the ground, and that did definitely reduce the burden of rushes. The other thing that we have been doing in the last 2 or 3 years, the River Blackwater Catchment Trust, who are a group who look after the waterways associated with the River Blackwater, which runs into Lough Neagh, have done a weed wiping service where they'll come along and they'll do weed wiping, and the weed wiping is very effective on rushes. Right now, the only rushes that would be giving me a major problem down there are rushes that I have left in the areas where I'd be hoping curlews will be nesting. I'm just leaving that. I've left that this couple of years. But the areas that have been that got the mushroom compost and that have been weed wiped, they are fairly free of rushes now. The weed wiping's a great job. I'm a great believer in the weed wiping for the simple reason that
Can you explain what weed wiping is? Oh, targeted.
It's targeted, yeah. You've got a machine that runs along, and there's like a carpet or a brush on it, which just brushes on the rushes alone. It doesn't brush then on the grasses and whatever you have underneath. So if the rushes are at the right stage and you do the weed wiping at the right stage, you'll kill your rushes, but you won't kill your grass. As I said earlier on, we don't spray down there for the simple reason that I think that spraying kills everything. It stunts your grass. Spraying also targets the sort of grasses that you want to keep. It will kill them as weeds. So I'm a firm believer in letting that type of ground, leaving it alone. Leave your clover alone. The spraying is also hard on clover. Leave it alone. Leave the species or the type of grasses that have become acclimatized and that are not natural to that area. Leave them be. It does over time nearly turn into a multi-species sward, and it's the hot thing at the minute, particularly among dairy farmers. But you finish up then with a multi-species sward with the rushes ideally gone, and you'll grow a load of grass if you can keep the clover and keep the grasses that are accustomed to your farm and to your soil type and to the elevation. You'll grow plenty of grass if you keep the clover and the worms right.
Okay, fair enough. Kirsten Bailey Parker says, good to know regarding calving. My first calf is due any day. I think that was talking about calving outside. Aoife Sullivan says, hello all, what do you think of the idea of adding seaweed to cattle's diet to help reduce methane emissions? Any?
Yeah, I suppose my attitude towards that there is I would think that the Dexters are, because they're half the size of a commercial cow, they're putting out half the emissions. Seaweed, I think, has a place probably in intensive environments where you have maybe a very large dairy farms and very large feedlots, which there are a few of in Ireland at the minute. Seaweed would have a place in those areas. If it's proven that seaweed reduces emissions, yeah, no doubt it could be added to the diet, particularly in those highly intensive situations. I personally don't think that the emissions from low intensity type situations like mine are a massive problem. If there is an emissions problem within farming, it is in the feedlots and it's in the very intensive and definitely the zero grazed dairy farms. But as I say, seaweed may have a place in those type of scenario.
Okay, perfect. So Sean Garvey says, check out Pros Silva Ireland for continuous cover forestry management. And his other question is, do Dexters eat the rushes?
Yeah, believe it or not, yeah, Dexters are fairly effective against rushes. If you have your rushes topped, from now on, and you've got a nice green rush, the Dexters will definitely clean them up. They're very effective at that, and it's as good as topping, to be fair, you know. The first question from Sean there, sorry, was
oh, he just says you were talking about agroforestry. I think he says check out Pro Silva Ireland for continuous cover forestry management.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in that, Sean. If you want to get in contact with me, I think that's something that I'd be really interested in.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Aoife Sullivan says, thanks. Something I've been reading about in terms of the seaweed methane question that you answered.
Yes.
So, Pat, what do you think are the biggest challenges for upland farmers? And I suppose, how do you feel that your type of farming is combating this?
I suppose the challenges for upland farming, I suppose, the cap and the fact that you're in an SAC or an SPA, a lot of farmers see this as being quite restrictive. Maybe me not so much, because I'm focused on to a good extent on the conservation aspect of it. But there's no doubt that when you're in an SPA or an SAC, you can't fence the land. Number one, that is a problem. It's a problem as regards drawn down entitlements, and a lot of farmers in upland areas and in the west of Ireland have a bee in the bonnet about this. Now, maybe the no fence technology, if the department look favourably on it, they would see no fence as being a good enough replacement, or maybe even a better replacement than traditional post and wire fencing. And if they look favourably on that technology, it's possible that maybe that land could be utilised more. Farmers would be more inclined to put their animals up there and do conservation type grazing, and avoid the expenditure and avoid falling out with the government and with the EU on the special birds directives. I suppose going forward, I would hope that the next cap will be more favourable towards extensive farmers on those marginal and mountainy type areas. That the package that will come in will be a bit warmer towards those farmers. There is a sort of a perception out there that those farmers have been marginalised by the nature of CAP and the drive towards production. I think as the whole green idea takes off, I would be hoping that the powers that be will see the benefit that this type of land creates. That up on Slieve Bay, where I'm doing the conservation grazing at the minute, it's a pretty popular area for walking, and people walk up there, and I do walk up there as well. But you won't see much. The views are nice, but you won't see an awful lot of wildlife up there. And I'd be hoping that the public good that I would do would be that when people walk up there in 4 or 5 years' time, they'll see more hen harriers, they'll see skylarks, they'll see grouse, possibly curlews, brown hares. That would be something that the government and the EU would look on that as a good that I'd be doing, and that I would be rewarded, and farmers like me in farming big areas of mountainy type land will be rewarded for that service.
So, I mean, you've got obviously a system going on with your Dexters and selling direct to customer and stuff, but for the majority of farmers in your area, is it hard to be productive with an upland farm? And therefore, is abandonment is a big issue unless they're supported through agri-environment schemes?
Yeah, well, I suppose ultimately in marginal areas, you are quite dependent on subsidy to survive. And as I sort of have half explained, you're not gaining enough subsidy, I think, for the good that farmers in these areas are doing wildlife wise. Personally speaking, I think most farmers are looking to protect wildlife. Farmers are see themselves as custodians, definitely down in the marginal type area where I am. The farmers around me are wildlife friendly. The fact that we have curlews down there, the fact that we have a hen harrier coming down into our area, those farmers are friendly towards wildlife. They're doing a good. They're not pushing their land too much. I would say that in marginal areas like mine, if you push that land, if you go the route of high stocking rates and applying a lot of fertilizer and a lot of slurry, over time your ground will become very demanding of those inputs. You put a good few continental type cattle on marginal land, they go out and they tramp it, and you don't get you start to get disappointed with the amount of grass you're growing. So then you go with the nitrogen and the slurry, and you finish up then having to reseed it and maybe sow ryegrass, and you have a monoculture. And that, to my mind, doesn't work on that marginal land, because the land then becomes churned up, it becomes wet. You're forced then maybe to start to drain it, and you get into then a cycle of a bit of a vicious cycle where you're using a lot of inputs and you're reseeding every 5 or 6 years, and you're probably, the inputs are eating into what the actual profit that you can actually gain on the farm, and you still then are dependent on subsidy. My attitude would be, forget about the big inputs, use the clover, use your worm, protect your worms, protect the bacteria in your soil, and go low inputs, maximize the amount of subsidy that you retain, and you're also then doing I think you're doing a public good. You're going to have more of a habitat, you're going to have more wildlife, you're going to have less stress yourself, you're not out on the tractor all the time, you're not, farming flat out all the time. Like my farming day is maybe 3-4 hours a day in a busy time. I'm not a big fan of tractor work. I find it a bit boring and methodical. I'm inclined to nearly get some young fella in to do that. Now, I suppose just when I'm on that point, I do know that a lot of farmers go mechanized because the mechanization encourages a son maybe to stay on a farm. You know, the big dairy farmers around me, particularly close to where I live here, they buy the best of kit, and the young fella jumps on the tractor and he's happy out. Maybe he does a bit of contracting or a bit of whatever on the side. And I think that's a good thing, because it keeps an interest, and over time that young fella will stay in farming, and I suppose over time he'll become less machinery orientated, and then the farming will stay in his blood. So I'm not opposed to machinery from that point of view, but I sort of do feel that a lot of farmers are farming to keep big German agriculture machinery manufacturers in business, and maybe that's not the best idea in the world. You know, maybe the money that the farmers are making should be used some other way, as opposed to huge expenditure in machinery. Maybe it should be used to extend your farm, or to go with a different type of stock, or maybe just go on a holiday and enjoy some, you know, as opposed to giving it all to the big machinery manufacturers.
Yeah, no, it's funny, isn't it? It's kind of don't work. Was it harder? Just work smarter, sort of thing on it all. I hear this a lot from farmers that I speak to, actually, which is, you know, the kind of there's a rat race within the farming world, but actually low impact and low input farming actually means kind of more time for your animals, more time for your
Yes, for yourself,
you know,
yeah.
for yourself, for your family, whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe less pressure in the bank, and it kind of seems to make economic sense. But I suppose more very often industry has a louder voice than any of that. So
yeah. Listen, for the last 20 or 30 years, farming has, as you say, it has turned into a bit of a rat race. There's a lot of pressure on farmers to keep up with the farmer next door. The farmer next door buys a John Deere, you have to buy a Fendt. There's this thing out there, you know, and then you do come under pressure. Then you have to generate more income. You have to use more inputs, and your time doesn't become your own. Then, you know, if you're milking cows 7 days a week and you've a fleet of machinery and all that thing going on, you don't have much time for yourself, and you don't have, as you say, much time maybe to holiday, and much time to do things that maybe you should be doing or would be more beneficial to you over the long term. You know, that's where I'd be at. But again, as I say, because the machinery is an incentive for young fellas to stay in farming, I'm ambivalent enough. You know, I see loads of young lads there. I met them on the road today, all driving 18, 19, 20-year-old lads driving tractors. You know, they will eventually be farmers or farming engineers or something like that there. So there's a good to that too.
Yeah, kind of the carrot that gets them in.
Exactly.
So just on your cattle, because you were saying that you don't like doing much tractor work yourself, how do you supplement the feeding of your cows?
Not too much, Bridget, to be absolutely honest. Just I make round bale silage, and that's the main feeding that they get. The Dexters seem to be able to do okay over the winter without a huge amount of supplementation. If you've got good enough silage, they seem to be able to overwinter fine on that. Probably because of their small frame and their small stature. If they get enough feeding, they seem to do well. I'm also a believer in the compensatory growth idea, in that if you don't overfeed your cattle during the winter and they're not overfat, when you put them out onto good grass, bang, they turn in, as they say down here, they turn inside out. You know, animals out for 6 weeks or so on great grass, they turn from being maybe a fat score 2, 3, they'll go into a fat score 4 within a month, and their frames grow, and it makes a huge difference to them. So I'm a sort of the opinion that farmers should utilize that compensatory growth. It also allows you to save a bit of money as well on inputs. And I suppose as regards the Dexters and feeding concentrates, the only I buy maybe a bag or two every week of concentrates, and what I use it for is to keep them coming after me. When you go out into the field, if you've a bucket of meal with you, particularly if you want to move them from paddock to paddock, Dexters can be hard enough to move. They're not too inclined to even go out onto a road or any wee boundary at all, and one of them will go back, and if one goes back, they'll all go back. They're very herd. They're a huge herd instinct in them that way. So for a few days before you'd move them, you'd go out with a meal and throw a wee bit on the ground, maybe, or throw a bit in the trough, and then bang, the whole thing will follow you. And that's what I would be. Most of the concentrate that I would buy in, that's what I'd be buying it for. Lads coming after me instead of running away from me.
Yeah, fair enough. So unless anyone else has any questions, I'm just going to the last of my kind of questions. Where would you start advising a farmer who is hill farming on how to, like, what are the steps maybe to be a bit more low input and low impact on the farm?
Yeah, I suppose, as I say, I firmly believe that you've got to do very little as regards fertilizer or spraying or any of that sort of stuff. If the species that you have on your mountain or on your farm at the minute is nearly bound to be the species that's best suited to it. If you give clover a chance and give your worms a chance and let the soil do its own thing, you will get results. I personally speaking, from any type of land. On our farm here, we have the 3 types of land. We have good land, we have midland land, and we'll call the mountain bad land, but I don't see it as bad land. I think it's great. But we have the 3 types, and the 3 types are all thriving basically by lowering our inputs, encouraging clover, encouraging the species that are there already, and letting the land work for itself. When you put cattle on it, their inputs that they give, they fertilize the ground themselves naturally, and to my mind, that's all you have to do. If you can get your inputs down to the sort of levels that I'm at and keep your outputs at a reasonable level, and again, I am a big believer in maximizing the amount that you bring in subsidy. Farmers in marginal land and in bigger mountainous type areas have to maximize the subsidy. There are possibly 10 different schemes out there at the minute, from GLAS to the BDGP to BEAP to there's a myriad of schemes. There's a fair bit of paperwork to it, but you've got to get into all those schemes and maximize the amount that you're bringing in from the EU and from the government. I would be aiming here to get sort of half your income from profit on the land and about half in subsidy. And if you can get to that point with a low input system, you should be able to pull a reasonable wage from a farm.
Fair enough. And on that, what is your kind of the feeling about the future of uphill farming? Are you positive about it?
Yeah, I'd be more positive about hill farming now than I would have been maybe when we started off. Hill farming is going to become a thing, I think. If you even if you look in the UK when they exited the EU, which may not have been the best thing that ever happened, but they have created a system over there now where farmers are being rewarded basically on the basis of conservation grazing and doing low inputs. They're being paid to do those sorts of things. And I think over the next 15, 20 years, the EU will be doing the same type of thing. The next cap, I would imagine, will be better for farmers in marginal upland areas. They will be rewarded for creating, as I call it, a public good. And I think they should be. And I will be actually optimistic about where that type of land is going. There'll be an income to be derived from it, and it will be rewarding to farm that type of land because you will be creating something that other people appreciate, and I think that can only be good.
Brilliant. And then finally, Pat, how does it make you feel to have a kind of a farm running alongside a thriving kind of nature environment? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, well, listen, I suppose it's sort of been my objective all my life. When I was a young fella, 8 or 10 years of age, in the wintertime, we used to look forward to snow because we get out tracking, and you'd be out tracking hares and rabbits and whatever, foxes, and I love that, and you track a hare and then you'd find her and put her up, and that was brilliant. I got a real kick out of that. And I remember then when we got a bit older, maybe we were going to the bog, and at that time there was much more. The bog was a better habitat at that stage. It hadn't become grown over as much with the Malina grass, and when you went up to the bog, there were grouse molting in the dust along the track. There was hundreds of skylarks. Every wee skylark had his own wee patch of sky, and he was defended all the time. If you're up in March, you'd see 50 or 100 hares in the mating season, and curlews, lapwings, all those things were around. And the fact that I have some of those things now again on the farm down there, I have a hen harrier, I have loads of hares, I have skylarks, grouse up on the mountain, and if I can enhance that, or over the next 5 or 10 years, if I can get to a situation where there are a few more flocks of grouse up there and there are more breeding pairs of hen harriers, and I can go out and see them and walk out there and interact with them and take photographs of them and sound links on and whatever else, that'll be, I'll definitely get a kick out of that. I'll be happy with that.
Brilliant. Pat, listen, you're an
Yep.
inspiration. Thanks a million.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us this evening. Thanks to everyone else for joining us.
I'm a bit embarrassed at that, but
no, not at all. I think that's really nice. There's a few people writing in. Thanks. Not a farmer,
yeah,
but
thanks
a session.
everyone for tuning in. Delighted to participate.
Absolutely. And if anyone wants to contact you, Pat, directly, how can they do that? Are you on social media? Are you? Is it an email or? Is there
just listen. I'm happy enough to give out the phone number if you want. Maybe you can put it up, Bridget. If anyone, or my email address, I'm happy to talk to anyone. I'm a bit of a Luddite. I'm on Facebook, but I don't do an awful lot on social media. I should do more, but I'm happy enough to, if anyone wants to contact me and have a chat with me, I'm more than happy to put
it. Look, people can send me an email at info@farmingfornature.ie and I can forward it on to you, and then you guys can have the chat then.
Yeah, you can, if you want, you can put my mobile on Farming for Nature. I'm as I say, I'm happy to talk to anyone and give a bit of advice,
Brilliant. That's very kind of you.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
So if anyone's interested, we'll if you'd like to share this with anyone, it'll be up on our YouTube channel by tomorrow. And then our next Q&A is next Monday. Actually, we're skipping over. We bring it forward a week just due to holidays, but and it's with Wexford farmer Nicholas Redmond, and so he'll be talking about how he's made his farm into a nature reserve. So feel free to join us then. That's next Monday at 8 p.m. Otherwise, thanks very much again, Pat, for joining us. Really nice, lovely to hear about your farm.
A wee addendum there. I'm running a farm walk. I think it's the 14th of, is the 19th of August.
You'll be able to find it up on our website anyway, because there's about 30 of them. I don't know the dates off heart. And
up on Slieve Bay, where the hen harriers and the cattle will be up there at that stage. So if anyone wants to tune into that or come along to that, feel free.
Brilliant. So that's up on our website, up on the homepage. You'll see a link to farm walks, and you'll see you just have to register for Pat's one. It's €10 per individual to join, but it's a couple of hours up in what looks like a beautiful part of North Monaghan.
Beautiful, fabulous views, and it's worth a visit.
Brilliant. Pat, listen, thanks really for your time tonight, and
thanks very much.
And thanks for everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.